She trapped me in a freight elevator during my own company launch and told 50 elite investors I was too incompetent to manage her son's money. So I systematically dismantled every social status symbol she had left. I was 29 years old, standing in a dim service elevator, pounding my bleeding fists against steel doors while my life's work evaporated upstairs. Beatrice did this. My mother-in-law, the woman who had smiled at my app's beta launch and called me an ambitious match for Ethan through a tightly clenched jaw. She had shown up early to our $2.5 million seed funding dinner at a boutique Seattle hotel, claiming she wanted to help set up the displays. I should have known better. I should have told the event staff to bar her from the room, but Ethan had insisted. He said she knew half the venture capitalists on the guest list, that her presence would lend us an air of established credibility. Instead, she rearranged my seating charts. She threw away my custom name tags, replacing them with generic white stickers she found in the hotel business center. I was already operating on 3 hours of sleep and pure adrenaline, trying to fix the chaos. When she walked up to the podium, she held a glass of sparkling water. She tripped, or pretended to trip, and spilled the entire glass directly onto my laptop keyboard. The screen flickered green and died. My entire presentation, my localized financial models, gone. I was forced to use a laggy, borrowed tablet. I was on the verge of a panic attack, but I held it together. I told myself I just needed to get through the next 2 hours. Then Beatrice put a hand on my shoulder and asked me to run down to the basement kitchen to check on the vegan appetizers. She said the hotel staff wasn't answering the intercom. I stepped into the service elevator. It smelled like stale grease and industrial floor cleaner. Beatrice stepped out. As the heavy steel doors began to slide shut, she grabbed a solid brass luggage cart from the hallway and jammed it forcefully into the outer track. The doors hit the brass, tried to retract, and locked in place with a harsh mechanical grind. I hit the open button. Nothing. I hit the emergency call button. Dead silence. I started screaming. I banged on the doors until the skin on my knuckles split and smeared red on the brushed steel, but nobody heard me. The elevator shaft was situated directly next to the kitchen exhaust fans, a constant, deafening roar of industrial ventilation. I was entirely alone in a 6x6 steel box. Beatrice took the stairs up. She walked into a private dining room filled with 50 venture capitalists, angel investors, and tech journalists, and she announced that I was having a severe, uncontrollable panic attack in the bathroom. She told them I was simply too fragile for the pressure of a CEO role. With a deeply convincing, sympathetic sigh, she suggested to the room that Ethan, my husband, who was ostensibly my COO, take over the company instead. Meanwhile, I was losing my voice. I sat on the floor of the elevator, my knees pulled to my chest, listening to the hum of the fans and watching the battery on my phone, which had no signal in the shaft, slowly drain to zero. 55 minutes later, a prep cook named Callum heard a faint banging sound. He walked over, saw the jammed luggage cart, and pulled it away. The doors slid open. I didn't even stop to thank him. I sprinted up 2 flights of emergency stairs, sweating, frantic, my hair plastered to my forehead, my knuckles taped up in a napkin I'd found in my pocket. I burst into the dining room. It was the final networking hour. The pitch was over. Beatrice was standing near the bar. She looked at me, then looked at the bewildered investors, and sighed loudly. She didn't have to say a word. My appearance, heaving chest, wild eyes, bruised hands, just proved her point. During the closing remarks, she actually raised a glass and made a loud, patronizing toast about the importance of supporting women's mental health in the workplace. Her sister Martha, who had flown in from Chicago just for the dinner, actually chuckled. She swirled her martini like my ruined career was evening entertainment. Ethan stood quietly near the back of the room, looking at the floor. He didn't defend me. He didn't interrupt her. We didn't get the funding. 3 different firms pulled out the next morning, citing leadership instability. That was the exact moment I decided Beatrice would feel what it meant to watch her proudest achievements crumble into public humiliation. The first strike was her inaugural charity gala. Beatrice had spent 18 months organizing a $1,000 a plate fundraiser for the local symphony. It was her crowning social achievement, her chance to prove she was the undisputed queen of the Seattle philanthropic scene. She had a vendor management portal for the event. I knew this because she had asked me to set up her iPad months ago, and I knew her password. It was Ethan's birth year and her maiden name. She used it for absolutely everything. I logged in on a Tuesday night. I systematically canceled the 5-star catering contract. I waited until 48 hours before the event, past the point of no return. Then, I accessed a wholesale restaurant supplier and ordered $2,000 worth of cheap frozen corn dogs, bulk tater tots, and 50 boxes of discount white Zinfandel. Saturday night arrived. 500 high society guests pulled up in black cars and walked into the ballroom in tuxedos and silk gowns. They found a chaotic, tragic buffet of microwave food sitting under heat lamps. The smell of fried corn batter permeated the floral arrangements. Beatrice stood at the podium in her gold Oscar de la Renta gown, her face flushed dark red, desperately blaming the venue management over the microphone. But the event manager didn't take the fall. She marched right up to the stage with a printed digital changelog, showing Beatrice's exact account credentials and IP address. Next was her induction as president of the Crestview Country Club. She had coveted that position for 2 decades. She had clawed her way through committees and boards, stepping on anyone who got in her way. The morning of her swearing-in ceremony, I created a burner email address on a public library computer. I emailed the club's entire ethics board. I attached screenshots. Weeks prior, when she had visited our house and left her iPad unlocked on the kitchen counter, I had quietly scrolled through her private text threads with Martha. I photographed her mocking the other board members. She called the current president a dementia-riddled alcoholic and detailed exactly which members of the finance committee were quietly facing bankruptcy. The ethics board didn't even wait for a meeting. They sent a courier to her house with a formal suspension notice office just as she was putting on her diamond tennis bracelet for the ceremony. Her big coronation never happened. She wasn't even allowed on the property. I drove past her house later that afternoon and saw her sitting in her driveway in her tailored white suit, sobbing into her steering wheel. The final blow was her luxury Mediterranean yacht charter. She had bragged about this $18,000 trip with her elite bridge club for an entire year. She wouldn't stop talking about the private chef, the excursions in Monaco, the exclusivity of it all. I accessed her travel portal. I canceled her specific passport clearance forms and Port Authority registrations, checking the box for an abrupt medical emergency. She flew all the way to Barcelona. She dragged her matching Louis Vuitton luggage through the terminal, only to be denied boarding at the port. The automated system flagged her lack of clearance. Her wealthy friends, unwilling to lose their deposits, sailed away to Monaco without her. She stood screaming at a Spanish Port Authority officer in the pouring rain, stranded on the docks. I robbed her of the one trip she cared about most, the one status symbol she couldn't buy her way back into. I sat at my kitchen island that night, drinking a glass of wine, scrolling through her frantic, unhinged social media posts from a Barcelona airport hotel. I felt a cold, hard sense of peace. But Ethan didn't come home from the office. He didn't answer my texts. He didn't answer my calls. He finally showed up 2 days later, walking through the front door with a blank expression. He walked straight into our bedroom, packed a canvas duffel bag in total silence, and walked back out. He barely looked at my face. When I asked him what he was doing, he just shook his head, got into his car, and drove to a hotel downtown. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon at 2 Delilo, a process server knocked on my office door. I was sitting at my desk, trying to salvage a secondary pitch deck for a smaller group of angel investors. The server was a young guy in a windbreaker. He asked for my name, handed me a thick manila envelope, and walked away. I thought it was a lawsuit from the catering company, or maybe the country club threatening legal action for the data breach. I tore open the flap and pulled out the crisp, heavy paper. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was a formal summons for a deposition. I walked into the sterile, glass-walled law office the next morning at 9 LOAM. The receptionist offered me coffee, which I declined. My stomach was twisting into tight, painful knots. I was directed to a conference room at the end of the hall. I pushed the heavy glass door open. Ethan was already sitting at the long oak table, but he wasn't sitting next to the empty chair meant for me. He was sitting on the opposite side, next to an older, sharp-featured attorney named Ellis Strand. Strand was Beatrice's personal lawyer, the man who handled all her estate planning and real estate acquisitions. I sat down slowly. The leather chair squeaked in the quiet room. Ethan stared at his hands, resting flat on the table. Ellis Strand didn't offer a greeting. He simply opened a glossy black folder and slid a thick stack of paper across the polished oak. It was a forensic report. I looked down at the first page. It detailed every IP address, every login timestamp, every device ID used to cancel the caterers, send the country club emails, and access the travel portal. It was thorough. It didn't just point to my house. It pointed to the MAC address of my personal work laptop and the exact location of the public library terminal I had used. My client didn't hire the investigator who found this, Ellis said, his voice completely flat, devoid of any theatricality. I looked up. Ethan finally raised his eyes to meet mine. They were cold. Empty. Your husband did, Ellis finished. The silence in the room was absolute. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning vent above us. Ethan shifted slightly in his chair. You ruined her, Ethan said, his voice quiet but incredibly tense. You humiliated my mother in front of half the city. You thought I wouldn't notice you hovering around her iPad? You thought I wouldn't check the router logs when she called me crying from Spain? She locked me in a cage, Ethan, I said, my voice shaking. She sabotaged my company. She made a mistake, Ethan snapped, slamming his palm on the table. She was trying to help, and she panicked when the door jammed. You systematically destroyed her life. Ellis cleared his throat and slid a second document across the table. It had a court stamp on the top right corner. This is an injunction, Ellis said smoothly. As you know, Ethan is legally your spouse. More importantly, he is listed as a partial guarantor on your startup's initial business loan. My blood ran cold. The loan we took out to secure the office space and the server architecture. Given the evidence of malicious cyber activity and the impending civil suit my client is filing for emotional distress and financial damages, Ellis continued, folding his hands together. Ethan has exercised his right to freeze all shared assets, including your corporate operating accounts, effective as of 8 a.m. this morning. I grabbed my phone from my bag and opened my banking app. The startup's operating account, the one holding the last $50,000 I needed to keep the servers running and pay my 2 developers, read since. The status below it read, account frozen pending legal review. Ethan wasn't just testifying against me. He was suffocating the company I built, the one his mother had tried to steal for him. You have 30 days to vacate the office space, Ethan said, standing up and buttoning his jacket, and my lawyer will be in touch about the house. The heavy glass door clicked shut behind him, sealing the silence in the room. Ellis Strand didn't even look up from his glossy black folder. He calmly gathered his papers, tapping the edges against the oak table to align them perfectly, before slipping them into his leather briefcase. I'll have my paralegal email you the formal notice regarding the corporate accounts, Ellis said, his tone as casual as if he were discussing lunch plans. I strongly advise you not to attempt accessing them further. It will only complicate the civil suit. I didn't answer him. I couldn't. The air in my lungs felt like shattered glass. I looked down at my phone screen again. The zero balance stared back at me. $50,000. The runway I had bled for, the money I had pitched my heart out for, just erased by a single signature from my own husband. I stood up. My legs felt hollow. I walked out of the conference room, down the long hallway, past the receptionist who gave me a practiced, sympathetic smile, and pushed through the double doors to the street. Seattle was overcast, a light drizzle slicking the pavement. I stood on the corner of 4th Avenue and let the cold cold rain hit my face. I had two developers working for me, Rowan and Petra. They were brilliant 24-year-old kids who had taken a massive pay cut to build my app's backend because they believed in the vision. Payday was Friday. Today was Wednesday. I pulled up my personal checking account. $6,000. Ethan hadn't frozen that one yet, probably because my name was the only one on it. But $6,000 wouldn't cover payroll, let alone the Amazon Web Services bill due next week. If Oz didn't get paid, the servers went dark. If the servers went dark, the app died. Everything I had built over the last 3 years would just vanish into the digital ether. I walked back to the office. It was a modest, exposed brick space in Pioneer Square that smelled permanently like roasted coffee and old dust. When I unlocked the door, Rowan was at his desk, wearing noise-canceling headphones, typing furiously. Petra was at the whiteboard, mapping out a database migration. They looked up when I came in. They could tell immediately. What happened? Petra asked, dropping her dry erase marker. Did the secondary pitch fall through? I closed the door behind me and leaned against it. I didn't want to lie to them. I had always promised them radical transparency, but saying the words out loud made it real in a way I wasn't prepared for. Ethan froze the accounts, I said. My voice sounded thin, scraped out. Rowan pulled his headphones down around his neck. What do you mean froze? Like a bank error? No, I said, walking over to my desk and dropping my bag. Like legally froze. He's listed as a partial guarantor on the initial loan. His mother's attorney filed an injunction this morning. We have zero operating capital. Petra stared at me. But we pushed the major update on Sunday. We have the server load balancing scheduled for Friday night. We need the Oz tier upgrade. I know. Can we fight it? Rowan asked, standing up. Can we get a lawyer? With what money, Rowan? I snapped. The edge in my voice surprised me, and I instantly hated myself for it. I took a deep breath. I'm sorry. I have to figure this out. But I need to be honest with both of you. I can't guarantee your paychecks this Friday. If you need to start sending out resumes today, I will write you the best recommendations of your lives, and I will not hold it against you. The silence in the office was suffocating. I watched the realization wash over them. They were kids, but they weren't stupid. They knew what a frozen bank account meant for a startup living paycheck to paycheck. Petra looked at Rowan, then back at me. She picked up her marker. I'm not leaving until the servers shut me out. But if Oz goes down, we're dead in the water. I sat at my desk for the rest of the day making frantic phone calls. I called the bank. The branch manager was apologetic but firm. A legal injunction was a hard stop. Unless Ellis Strand filed a release or a judge overturned it, the money was untouchable. I called 3 different corporate defense attorneys. 2 required retainers I couldn't afford. The third, a sharp-voiced woman named Dana Voss, listened to my entire story before sighing heavily into the receiver. It's a textbook squeeze play, Dana told me. They know you don't have the personal capital to fight a protracted legal battle. They're trying to starve you out before you even make it to a courtroom. If your husband is on the loan, he has a fiduciary right to freeze assets if he suspects malicious financial activity or risk to his liability. But there wasn't any malicious financial activity, I argued. I didn't touch the company money. I used a personal computer to cancel a catering contract and a country club membership. Doesn't matter, Dana said. The cyber intrusion aspect gives them enough cover to claim you're erratic and a liability. To lift the freeze, we'd need to file an emergency motion. That takes time. And money. How much? $10,000 retainer, minimum. I thanked her and hung up. I put my head on my desk. The raw, jagged truth was setting in. Ethan wasn't just leaving me. He was actively destroying me on behalf of his mother. He had sat across from me, watched my face, and handed me an eviction notice for my own life. At 6 p.m., I sent Rowan and Petra home. I stayed in the office, watching the rain streak the large industrial windows. I opened my laptop and started looking at personal loan rates, maxing out my credit cards, anything to keep the Oz servers running. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Check your inbox. You need to see what she's doing. I frowned. I didn't recognize the number. I opened my email client and refreshed. There was a forwarded message sitting at the top of my inbox. It was sent from a woman named Faye Durbin, one of the smaller angel investors who had been at the disastrous dinner. She had forwarded it to me with a single line. Thought you should know what's circulating. I scrolled down to read the original email. It was from Beatrice. It was a mass email sent to a BCC list that likely included every single venture capitalist, angel investor, and tech journalist who had been at the hotel that night. The subject line was, "A personal apology regarding the recent launch event." My stomach plummeted as I read her words. "To our esteemed colleagues and friends, I am writing to formally apologize for the uncomfortable scene you witnessed at the launch dinner earlier this week. It is with a heavy heart that I must disclose the reality behind the disruption. Unfortunately, my daughter-in-law is currently battling severe, undisclosed mental health and substance issues that have severely impacted her judgment and stability. In the days following the dinner, Ethan discovered deeply troubling irregularities in the company's operating accounts. Out of an abundance of caution, and to protect the investors who have already shown faith in the product, Ethan has taken over emergency control of the company and frozen all assets to prevent further embezzlement. We are getting her the help she so desperately needs. In the meantime, Ethan will be reaching out to each of you individually to discuss the restructuring of the executive board and the revised roadmap for the app. Thank you for your grace and understanding during this painful family crisis. Warmly, Beatrice." I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Embezzlement, substance issues. She wasn't just spinning a narrative to save face. She was systematically assassinating my character to a mailing list of the most influential people in Seattle's tech sector. And she was doing it while positioning Ethan as the savior who was going to take over my company. The luggage cart in the elevator wasn't a spontaneous act of petty sabotage. This was a hostile takeover. They wanted the app. Ethan had seen the beta numbers. He knew the user retention rate was skyrocketing. He knew the algorithm I built was highly marketable. He didn't want a divorce, he wanted a coup. My phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. She sent it to 40 people. You're completely blacklisted at every firm in the city. I typed back, who is this? 3 dots appeared, then vanished, then appeared again. Callum, from the hotel kitchen. I stared at the name, the prep cook, the guy who had moved the brass luggage cart and let me out of the elevator. I hit the call button on his number. It rang twice before he picked up. The background noise was loud, clanking pots, shouting voices, the hiss of a grill. You forwarded me the email? I asked, skipping any greeting. No, Callum said, his voice low, sounding like he was standing in a pantry or a walk-in fridge. My sister works as an administrative assistant at Vanguard Capital. She saw the email come through her boss's inbox. She recognized your name from the story I told her about the elevator. Why are you telling me this? Because, Callum said, hesitating for a second. Because I saw the woman who locked you in. I was on my smoke break by the loading dock. I saw her wedge the cart into the track. I saw her look around to make sure nobody was watching, and then she walked up the stairs. I stopped breathing. You saw her do it? Yeah, Callum. I need you to testify to that. My husband is trying to take my company, claiming I'm mentally unstable. If you tell a lawyer you saw her trap me, I can't. He interrupted. His voice was tight. I can't get involved in legal stuff. I have a record. It's stupid. Just a possession charge from when I was 19, but I'm on probation. If I get dragged into a rich people lawsuit, I'll lose this job. I wanted you to know what they were saying about you. Callum, please. They've frozen my bank accounts. They're going to evict me from my office. She told 50 investors I'm an embezzling addict. I'm sorry, he said. And then the line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone. I was entirely backed into a corner. No money, no reputation, no witness, and a husband who had seamlessly transitioned from a quiet, passive partner to a corporate shark executing his mother's playbook. I packed up my laptop. I turned off the overhead lights in the office, plunging the exposed brick into shadows. I locked the deadbolt and walked out into the rain. I drove home. I didn't know where else to go. The house was in both our names, but Ethan had paid the down payment. I fully expected the locks to be changed, but my key turned easily in the front door. I pushed it open. The house was dark. The air felt stale, empty. Ethan's presence was entirely gone. I walked into the kitchen and turned on the island pendants. Sitting exactly in the center of the quartz countertop was a single sheet of paper. I walked over to it. It was a printed letter, unsealed, unsigned. Sign over the intellectual property rights to the app to Ethan by 5 p.m. on Friday. If you do, the freeze on the accounts will be lifted so you can pay your developers, and we will not pursue the civil suit for the cyber intrusion against the country club and the travel agency. We will settle the divorce quietly. If you refuse, the servers will shut down on Monday. You will be sued for emotional and financial damages exceeding $1 million, and we will ensure the fraud and embezzlement allegations are handed over to the Seattle Police Department. Make the smart choice. It was printed on heavy, cream-colored cardstock, the exact same cardstock Beatrice used for her charity gala invitations. She wasn't just punishing me for the corn dogs and the canceled yacht. She was extorting me for my life's work. I crumpled the heavy paper in my fist. I looked around my empty kitchen, at the life I thought I had built with a man who had completely betrayed me. They thought I was going to fold. They thought the threat of police and bankruptcy would make me hand over the keys to my own kingdom. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and dialed a number I hadn't called in 4 years. It rang 5 times. I was about to hang up when a sharp, gravelly voice answered. It's past 10 o'clock, the voice said. Someone better be dead. Aunt Margot, I said. I need a favor. There was a pause on the line, the sound of a lighter flicking, a long inhale. Well, my mother's estranged sister said, exhaling a cloud of smoke I could practically hear over the speaker. You have my attention. Who are we ruining? My mother-in-law, I said, leaning my forehead against the cold glass of the kitchen window. The rain was coming down harder now, blurring the streetlights. And my husband. Margot let out a dry, rattling cough that morphed into a chuckle. I always said Ethan had the spine of a jellyfish. And Beatrice? Please, that woman wears pearls to the grocery store. Tell me everything. Do not skip the ugly parts. I didn't. I paced the length of the empty kitchen, the extortion letter still crushed in my left hand, and told her the entire sequence of events. I told her about the elevator, the sabotaged launch, the corn dogs, the yacht, the deposition, the frozen accounts, and the defamatory email. Margot didn't interrupt once. The only sound on the line was the occasional sharp intake of breath as she dragged on her cigarette. When I finally finished, my throat was dry and my chest was heaving. Read me the letter, she commanded. I smoothed the crumpled heavy cardstock against the quartz counter and read it aloud, word for word. And it's not signed? Margot asked. No, but you said it's printed on her custom gala invitation cardstock. The heavy cream stuff with the slight linen texture? Yes, Margot exhaled loudly. Arrogance makes people profoundly stupid. She didn't sign it because she thinks that gives her plausible deniability, but she used paper that can be traced directly back to her personal stationer in a forensic audit. It's a rookie mistake. Now, listen to me very carefully. You do not reply to Ethan. You do not reply to Beatrice. You do not reply to that unctuous lizard Ellis Strand. I have to pay my developers by tomorrow evening, Margot. If I don't, I lose them. If the Oz bill bounces on Monday, I lose the company anyway. They have me in a vice. They have you in a cardboard box and they're telling you it's a steel cage. Margot snapped. How much to keep the lights on and the kids paid? $15,000 would cover payroll for the month and server costs. But I can't accept a transfer. The corporate accounts are frozen, and if large sums suddenly appear in my personal checking, Ellis will subpoena that too and claim I'm hiding assets. I didn't say I was wiring it, Margot said. I live in Phoenix, not on the moon. I'm booking a flight right now. I'll be at SeaTac by noon tomorrow. I will bring a cashier's check made out directly to your cloud provider, and I will bring cash for your developers. We'll draft a private promissory note so it's legally a personal loan to them, not payroll. It bypasses the corporate freeze entirely. I closed my eyes. The relief was so sharp it physically hurt my chest. Margot, why are you doing this? We haven't spoken since Mom's funeral. Because your mother was a saint who let people walk all over her. And it drove me insane, Margot said, her voice softening just a fraction. And because I spent 30 years liquidating toxic assets for corporate private equity. I know exactly what a squeeze play looks like. Beatrice thinks she's playing chess. We're going to flip the damn board. See you tomorrow. She hung up. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the dead screen of my phone. The house was completely silent. I walked upstairs to the master bedroom. Ethan's closet was half empty. He had taken his suits, his golf clubs, his expensive watches. He had left behind all the casual clothes I had bought him over the years. I didn't sleep. I sat in bed with my laptop, going through the app's foundational architecture. Ethan was a partial guarantor on the business loan, but he wasn't a software engineer. He was a business development guy. He understood spreadsheets and networking. He didn't understand code. The intellectual property, the core algorithm that made the app valuable, was currently hosted on the company's central GitHub repository. If Ethan managed to force a legal seizure of the company's digital assets, he would get the domain, the branding, and the repo. Thursday morning, I got to the office at 7. The rain hadn't stopped. Rowan and Petra arrived at 8. They looked exhausted, carrying oversized coffees and wearing the same clothes they'd had on yesterday. We didn't sleep, Petra said, dropping her backpack on her chair. We spent the night looking at the back-end infrastructure. If Ethan takes over the Oz console, he can lock us out of the admin privileges in about 3 clicks. He won't get the chance, I said. I gathered them around my desk and lowered my voice, even though we were the only ones in the building. I have a private backer flying in today. Payroll is covered. The servers will be paid. Rowan slumped against the brick wall, rubbing his eyes. Holy shit. Are you serious? Yes, but it's a band-aid. Ethan and his mother are trying to extort me for the IP. They gave me a deadline of 5 p.m. tomorrow to sign it over. I told them about the letter. I didn't tell them about the defamation email to the investors. I was too ashamed to say the words embezzlement and addiction out loud to my own team, but I told them enough. Petra's expression hardened. She was 24, but she had the intense, calculating stare of an industry veteran. So we build a poison pill. What do you mean? I asked. The repo is currently synced to the live servers, Petra explained, grabbing a dry erase marker and walking to the whiteboard. If Ethan gets legal control, he gets the current build. But the core algorithm, the proprietary sorting logic, I can isolate that. I can extract it from the main directory and bury it in a fragmented, encrypted local drive. We replace the live algorithm with a degraded, open-source placeholder. Rowan caught on immediately, standing up straight. If he takes the company, he gets an empty shell. The app will look exactly the same on the surface, but the back-end efficiency will drop by 90%. It'll crash if more than 100 users log on simultaneously. The actual IP, the brain of the whole operation, stays with you. Is that legal? I asked. You're the CEO and lead developer, Petra said, uncapping the marker. You're authorizing an infrastructure migration for security purposes. If he steals the company on Friday, he inherits the migration. By the time he realizes the core code is missing, he'll already own the liability. Do it, I said. Drop everything else. Clone the repo and strip the live version. At 10:00 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was Ethan. Just checking in, the text read. I know you're probably angry, but I'm doing this to protect us both from further financial ruin. I hope you're finding some clarity. The deadline is tomorrow at 5. He was building a paper trail. If a judge ever saw his texts, Ethan would look like the patient, concerned husband dealing with an erratic spouse. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to text him a photo of the extortion letter. I'm reviewing the paperwork, I replied. Keep him calm, keep him confident. At 11:30 a.m., I got another text. This one was from a number I had saved the night before. Callum, can we talk? I stepped out into the hallway of the office building, the sound of Rowan and Petra aggressively typing echoing behind me. I called him. They fired me, Callum said the second he picked up. His voice was thick with anger. The hotel manager pulled me into the office this morning. Said a VIP guest from the tech dinner complained about my attitude and said I was loitering near the service elevator during the event. They let me go. Because I'm on probation, they said they could terminate me with cause. My stomach dropped. Beatrice, she had noticed him moving the cart, or she had simply realized someone had to have let me out, and she systematically eliminated the only loose end. She was covering her tracks by destroying a 19-year-old kid's livelihood. Callum, I am so sorry, I said, leaning against the cold plaster wall of the hallway. I didn't tell anyone you were the one who helped me. I swear. I know you didn't, he said bitterly. She just aimed a shotgun at the kitchen staff, and I caught the blast. But here's the thing. I don't care about the probation violation anymore. I don't care about keeping my head down. If you need me to talk to a lawyer, I'll do it. I'll sign an affidavit. I'll testify in court. I want to see that woman burn. Where are you? I asked, sitting at a bus stop outside the hotel. Take the bus to Pioneer Square. Go to the roasted coffee shop on the corner of 4th and Main. Wait for me there. I'm going to introduce you to someone. I hung up and checked the time. 12:15 p.m. I left the developers working on the poison pill and drove to SeaTac. I stood at the arrivals terminal, watching the endless stream of travelers coming down the escalators. I hadn't seen Margot in 10 years, but she was impossible to miss. She was 65, wearing a sharp black leather trench coat, dark sunglasses indoors, and carrying a single vintage Goyard duffel bag. Her silver hair was cut in a severe, immaculate bob. She looked like a woman who fired CEOs for breakfast. She walked straight up to me, pulled off her sunglasses, and assessed me in one sweeping glance. You look terrible, she said. Your posture is defensive. Stop hunching your shoulders. They want you to feel small. Don't do the work for them. It's good to see you too, Margot. She gave me a brief, fiercely tight hug. She smelled like Virginia Slims, an expensive, sharp perfume. Let's get out of this depressing airport. We have work to do. We sat in my car in the parking garage. Margot unzipped her duffel bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. She tossed it onto my lap. $15,000 in a cashier's check made out to Amazon Web Services, she said. And $10,000 in bound hundreds for your developers. The promissory notes are in there too. Have them sign it. It keeps the ears and your husband's lawyer off their backs. Margot, I don't know how long it will take me to pay this back. I don't care, she said, waving a hand dismissively. Consider it venture capital. Now, tell me about the extortion letter. I handed her the crumpled piece of heavy cardstock. Margot turned on the overhead dome light and studied it. She rubbed the paper between her thumb and forefinger. She held it up to the light to look at the watermark. Crane and Company, she murmured. 100% cotton, pearl white. Oh, Beatrice, you absolute amateur. She dropped the letter back into my lap. Here's what we're going to do. We are going to let the 5 p.m. deadline pass tomorrow. Ethan said he'll shut down the servers and go to the police with the embezzlement claims if I don't sign. He can try, Margot said, her eyes gleaming with a predatory light, but he can't go to the police. Because if he goes to the police, he has to open the company's financial books for a criminal investigation. And if he opens the books, he proves you didn't embezzle a dime. He's bluffing. The defamation email, on the other hand, is not a bluff. She put it in writing and sent it to 40 investors. I have a witness, I said quietly. Margot stopped digging through her bag and looked at me. A witness to what? To the elevator. The prep cook who let me out. Beatrice got him fired this morning to cover her tracks. He's furious. He's waiting for us at a coffee shop right now. And he said he'll sign an affidavit swearing he saw her wedge the cart into the door. Margot stared at me for a long, silent moment. A slow, terrifying smile spread across her face. A third party, independent witness to physical endangerment and unlawful imprisonment, Margot whispered, as if savoring a fine wine. Oh, honey, we aren't just going to keep your company. We're going to take her house. We drove to Pioneer Square. The rain was finally letting up, leaving the Seattle streets slick and reflective. We walked into the coffee shop. Callum was sitting in a booth in the back, staring intensely at a cold cup of black coffee. He looked up as we approached. He was young, maybe 19 or 20, wearing a faded hoodie and looking deeply exhausted. I slid into the booth across from him. Margot slid in next to me, instantly commanding the space. Callum, I said. This is my aunt, Margot. Margot didn't offer to shake his hand. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the wooden table. Callum, you have a prior conviction. A possession charge, my niece tells me. Callum bristled, his shoulders tensing. Yeah, so what? I did my community service. I just had to finish out the probationary period. So what? Margot said smoothly. Is that Beatrice's attorney will use that to destroy your credibility on the stand. He will say you're a disgruntled former employee with a criminal record who is lying for money. Are you prepared for that? I don't care, Callum said, his jaw tightening. She treated me like dirt, and then she ruined my life to save her own skin. I know what I saw. Good, Margot said, reaching into her leather coat and pulling out a sleek silver pen and a small legal pad. Write down everything. The exact time you went out for your smoke break. The exact color of the dress she was wearing. The sound the metal made when she wedged the cart. How hard she pushed it. Did she look around? Did she hesitate? I want sensory details. I want a narrative so tight Ellis Strand chokes on it. As Callum started writing, his handwriting messy but forceful, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a notification from my home security system, the one Ethan and I had installed last year. Motion detected, front porch. I opened the app and tapped the live feed. A large white box truck was backed into my driveway. 3 men in matching navy blue uniforms were walking up my front steps. One of them was holding a clipboard. Ethan stepped into the frame. He was wearing his expensive beige trench coat, pointing at the front door, talking to the men. He unlocked the door with his key and propped it open. What is it? Margot asked, noticing the blood drain from my face. I turned the phone around so she could see the screen. He hired movers. We watched in silence as the men walked into my house. A minute later, 2 of them walked back out, carrying the antique oak dining table I had inherited from my grandmother. It wasn't even Ethan's. It was mine. He was clearing out the house while he thought I was at the office. He's trying to rattle you, Margot said, her voice completely devoid of emotion. It's a classic intimidation tactic. He takes the furniture, he takes the space, he makes you feel entirely displaced. He's taking my grandmother's table, I said, my voice shaking with a sudden violent surge of adrenaline. Let him take it, Margot said softly, her eyes locked on the screen. Let him take every single piece of wood and fabric in that house. It just adds to the final bill. Callum pushed the legal pad across the table. He had filled 3 pages. Margot took it, scanned the first page, and nodded. Excellent. I know a notary 3 blocks from here. We're going to make this official. By 3 p.m., Callum's statement was notarized and safely tucked into Margot's duffel bag. We walked back to my office. When I unlocked the door, Rowan and Petra were still at their desks. Status? I asked. Petra spun her chair around. Migration complete. The core algorithm is extracted, encrypted, and sitting on a physical external drive in my backpack. The live servers are now running on the decoy placeholder. It looks identical on the front end, but if anyone tries to review the source code, they're looking at a hollowed-out pumpkin. Perfect, Margot said, walking over and dropping the manila envelope on Rowan's desk. You 2 are paid through the month. Server bills are handled. Nobody loses their apartment this week. Rowan opened the envelope, saw the bound stacks of cash, and let out a long, shaky breath. Who the hell are you? I'm the cavalry, Margot said, pulling out a cigarette and tapping it against her silver case, completely ignoring the no smoking sign on the exposed brick. Now, we have a deadline tomorrow at 5 o'clock, and we need to prepare the counterstrike. Margot unbuttoned her leather coat and draped it over a spare rolling chair. First things first, she said, looking around the exposed brick of the office. You need to text your husband. Tell him you received the letter, you understand the position you're in, and you want to finalize the IP transfer in person tomorrow, at his lawyer's office, 4:30. I stared at her. I thought you said we were letting the deadline pass. We are letting his deadline pass, Margot corrected, walking over to the whiteboard and picking up Petra's disclosure discarded marker. We are substituting it with our own. If you just go silent, Ethan might panic and shut down the Oz account early out of spite. He might try to lock the domain. We need him to believe he's won. We want him compliant, arrogant, and sitting in a room with us when the clock runs out. I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking slightly. I typed the text exactly as she dictated. Ethan, I read the letter. I don't have the money to fight you and I can't afford to be sued. Have Ellis drop the transfer documents. I'll be at his office at 4:30 tomorrow to sign. I hit send. It felt like swallowing broken glass, even knowing it was a trap. 3 minutes later, the typing bubble appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, the text came through. I'm glad you're being rational about this. I'll tell Ellis. See you tomorrow. He took the bait, I said, setting the phone face down on the desk. Of course he did, Margot said, drawing a harsh, thick line down the center of the whiteboard. Men like Ethan don't expect resistance once they've removed the money. They think capital is the only leverage that exists. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed again. It wasn't a text this time. It was an incoming call from a local Seattle number I didn't recognize. I assumed it was the bank, or maybe one of the movers Ethan had hired calling from my stolen dining table. I hit answer and put it on speaker so Margot could hear. Hello? Hi, is this the CEO of... The voice trailed off, coughing awkwardly. Sorry, let me start over. My name is Garrett Mercer. I'm a senior editor at Seattle Tech Weekly. Am I speaking with Ethan's wife? My stomach bottomed out. He didn't even use my name. He used my marital status. This is she, I said, my voice tight. Great, thanks for taking the call, Garrett said. His tone was professional but edged with that specific, hungry curiosity of a journalist who knows they have a scoop. I'm reaching out because we received a forwarded email this morning from a source at Vanguard Capital. It was a mass communication from a Beatrice, well, from your mother-in-law, regarding the recent leadership changes at your startup. Rowan and Petra both stopped typing. The office went dead silent. What leadership changes? I asked, playing dumb to buy time. The email states that you're currently dealing with severe substance abuse issues and that you've been removed from your position due to suspected financial embezzlement, Garrett said, reading the words with a detached, journalistic cadence that made them sound 1,000 times worse. It also states your husband is stepping in as interim CEO to audit the company. We're planning to run a short piece on it in tomorrow's morning newsletter, given the high profile of the investors at your seed dinner. I wanted to give you a chance to comment or offer a statement before we publish. They were going to publish it. Beatrice's private targeted assassination was about to become public record. Once an article like that hits the local tech ecosystem, it doesn't matter if it's true. The SEO alone would ruin me. Every time a future employer or investor Googled my name, embezzlement and substance abuse would be the first hits. I couldn't breathe. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. Margot leaned over my desk, picked up the phone, and turned off the speaker. She held it to her ear. Garrett, this is Margot Tate, acting legal counsel for the CEO, she said, her voice dropping into a register of pure, corporate ice. I strongly advise you to hold that peace. The email you received is currently the subject of an active defamation and extortion investigation. The claims are categorically false, and the author of that email is facing a substantial civil suit. There was a pause. Even without the speaker on, I could hear the faint, frantic scratching of Garrett's pen on the other end of the line. Can you provide proof that a suit has been filed? Garrett asked. I can provide you with something better, Margot said smoothly. If you kill the piece tomorrow morning, I will give Seattle Tech Weekly the exclusive rights to the actual story by tomorrow evening, complete with notarized affidavits, proof of corporate extortion, and on-the-record statements regarding an attempted hostile takeover by an unvested party. It's a much better headline than a messy family dispute, Garrett. It's a corporate coup. Another long pause. Tomorrow evening, Garrett asked. 5:30 p.m., Margot said. I will call you myself. Do we have a deal? I'll hold the piece until 6, Garrett said. If I don't hear from you, we run the original email. You'll hear from me, Margot said and ended the call. She tossed the phone back onto my desk. I was staring at her, my heart hammering against my ribs. She went to the press, I whispered. She actually let it leak to the press. She didn't let it leak, she engineered the leak, Margot corrected, lighting another cigarette right there in the office. She sent it to 40 people. You think Beatrice doesn't know that at least one of those venture capitalists gossips to the local trades? She wanted this in print. She wanted you radioactive. Petra stood up from her desk, her face pale. If that article runs tomorrow, we lose our entire user base. They'll uninstall the app the second they think the founder is stealing data or money. The article isn't going to run, Margot said firmly, because by 5:30 tomorrow, Ethan is going to be so thoroughly dismantled he'll be begging the press to ignore him. She looked at me. Where are you sleeping tonight? Because you aren't going back to that empty house. I don't know, I admitted. A motel out by the highway. My personal checking account isn't frozen yet, but I only have $6,000 and I need to conserve it. Nonsense, Margot said. She pulled her phone from her pocket and dialed a number. We are staying at the Fairmont, in the Olympic Suite. We are ordering room service, we are drinking expensive gin, and we are going to get 8 hours of sleep. I'm paying. Margot, the Fairmont is where the dinner was, I said, a wave of nausea washing over me at the mere mention of the hotel. That's where the elevator is. I know, Margot said, her eyes locking onto mine with terrifying intensity. Never let your enemies dictate your geography. You walk back into that building, you sleep in a bed that costs $1,000 a night, and you remember exactly who you are. We checked into the hotel 2 hours later. The concierge didn't recognize me from the disaster on Tuesday night. Or, if he did, he possessed the supreme professional grace not to show it. The suite was massive, overlooking the Seattle skyline, the rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows. I took a long, burning hot shower. When I came out in a thick white robe, Margot had already ordered dinner. A silver cart was parked in the living area, loaded with steak, roasted vegetables, and a bottle of gin sitting in a bucket of melting ice. I sat down at the table. I realized I hadn't eaten a full meal in 3 days. I forced myself to cut a piece of steak, my hand still feeling a little weak. Margot poured us both a glass of gin. Neat. She slid one across the tablecloth to me. Why do you hate her so much? I asked quietly, looking at my aunt. You didn't even know Beatrice until I told you about her last night. But you didn't just lend me money. You flew here. You're orchestrating a war. Why? Margot took a sip of her drink. She looked out the window at the dark, wet city. When your mother and I were in our 20s, we had a very small, very modest inheritance from your grandfather, Margot said, her voice losing its corporate edge, softening into something older and much more tired. It wasn't much, just enough to put a down payment on a house or start a business. Your mother gave her half to your father, who promptly lost it in a pyramid scheme. I used my half to start a boutique logistics firm in Chicago. I nodded. I knew pieces of this story, but my mother rarely talked about it. I was doing well, Margot continued. I had clients. I had a small team. And then I got married to a man who looked and sounded exactly like your Ethan. Handsome, connected, and entirely useless in a crisis. His family was old Chicago money, country clubs, charity galas, the whole insufferable circuit. His mother, a woman named Eleanor, decided I was entirely too blue-collar for their bloodline. She turned away from the window and looked at me. Eleanor didn't lock me in an elevator, Margot said quietly. She did something quieter. She used her connections at the regional banks to call in the commercial lines of credit on my logistics firm. All at once. She claimed it was a standard risk assessment, but it was targeted. She starved my company of cash. I had to lay off my team. I had to sell my trucks. And when I was completely broken, crying on my kitchen floor, my husband handed me divorce papers and offered to buy the remaining assets for pennies on the dollar. He let his mother destroy me, and then he picked the carcass. The gin burned my throat as I swallowed. It was the exact same playbook, a generational tactic of financial suffocation. I didn't fight back, Margot said, her voice hardening again. I didn't know how. I took the pennies, I moved to Phoenix, and I spent the next 30 years learning how the people at the top of the food chain tear each other apart. I learned corporate law. I learned hostile takeovers. I learned leverage. She picked up her glass. Beatrice is just Eleanor with a different zip code, and I'll be damned if I let her do to you what they did to me. We clinked our glasses together. The sound of the crystal was sharp and clear in the quiet room. I slept perfectly. The bed was immense, the sheets were heavy, and for the first time since Tuesday, the knot of sheer animal panic in my chest had untied itself. Friday morning arrived with clear skies. The rain had finally broken, leaving the city washed clean and bright. We checked out at noon. Margot paid the exorbitant bill in cash. We drove back to Pioneer Square. The office was humming with quiet, nervous energy. Rowan was obsessively checking the server loads on the decoy backend. Petra was pacing, drinking her fourth coffee. Status? Margot asked, dropping her Goyard bag on my desk. Decoy is holding steady, Rowan reported without looking away from his monitor. The front end looks beautiful. The app is fully functional for standard user navigation. But if anyone tries to access the proprietary sorting logic, or if the server load exceeds 100 concurrent users, it bottlenecks and crashes. It's exactly what you asked for. A hollowed-out pumpkin. And the real IP? I asked. Petra tapped the heavy, reinforced external hard drive sitting on her desk next to her keyboard. Encrypted, fragmented, and entirely localized. It does not exist on the cloud. If Ethan signs the papers today and seizes the corporate Oz account, he gets the pumpkin. I checked my watch. It was 1:30 p.m. 3 hours until the meeting at Ellis Strand's office. All right, Margot said, clapping her hands together once. We need to go over the sequence of events. Ellis is going to control the room. He's going to put a stack of paper in front of you. He is going to explain, very patronizingly, that by signing this, you are transferring all digital assets, copyright, and intellectual property to Ethan's new holding company. And I just sign it? I asked, my stomach doing a slight flip. Yes, Margot said. You sign it. You let Ellis take the paper. You let Ethan feel the rush of victory. Because the moment that ink dries, the liability shifts entirely to him. Once he is the legal owner of the IP, we introduce the extortion letter. We introduce Callum's notarized affidavit. And we remind them that blackmail is a felony. At 3:45 p.m., Margot and I left the office. We walked the 6 blocks to Ellis Strand's firm. The air was crisp, the sidewalks crowded with people finishing up their Friday workdays, completely unaware of the corporate execution I was walking into. The law office was on the 32nd floor. The receptionist recognized me from Wednesday. She gave me the same practiced, sympathetic smile, but her eyes flicked to Margot with a flicker of uncertainty. Margot didn't look like a defeated wife. She looked like an apex predator in a tailored suit. They're waiting for you in conference room B, the receptionist said quietly. We walked down the long glass-walled hallway. I could see them before I even pushed the door open. Ethan was sitting at the long oak table, wearing a crisp navy suit. He looked relaxed. He looked like a man who had already spent the money he was about to steal. Ellis Strand sat next to him, his glossy black folder open, a pristine stack of legal documents resting on the polished wood. But there was a third person in the room, sitting in the corner chair, legs crossed, wearing a stunning cream-colored cashmere sweater and a string of understated pearls, was Beatrice. She couldn't resist. She had orchestrated the entire destruction of my life from the shadows, hiding behind jammed luggage carts and anonymous vendor portals. But she needed to be in the room for the final kill. She needed to watch me sign it away. I pushed the heavy glass door open. It clicked shut behind us. Ethan looked up. He expected me to walk in alone, broken and exhausted. Instead, he saw me walk in with my shoulders back, followed immediately by Margot, who carried her own leather briefcase and an expression of utter disdain. Who is this? Ellis Strand asked, his flat, emotionless voice finally showing a crack of irritation. This is a closed mediation regarding marital assets. Outside counsel must be pre-approved. I'm not outside counsel, Margot said, pulling out a chair for me and then sitting down directly across from Beatrice. I'm her aunt. I'm here for moral support. Surely, given the presence of Ethan's mother, family members are permitted to observe. Beatrice's eyes narrowed. She didn't recognize Margot, but she instantly recognized the threat. People like Beatrice have a radar for anyone who doesn't flinch in their presence. Fine, Ellis said, tapping his pen against the legal pad. As long as she doesn't disrupt the proceedings. We are on a tight schedule. He looked at me. I assume since you requested this meeting, you have reviewed the terms of the IP transfer and are prepared to sign? I am, I said. My voice was steady. I didn't look at Ethan. I looked directly at the stack of paper. Ellis slid the documents across the table. This agreement stipulates that you voluntarily surrender all intellectual property, source code, back-end architecture, and branding rights of the app to Ethan's LLC. In exchange, Ethan will file an immediate release on the frozen corporate operating accounts, allowing you to pay your outstanding vendor debts. Furthermore, my client agrees not to pursue civil damages regarding the recent cyber intrusions against her personal accounts. It sounded so sterile, so legal. He made extortion sound like a standard business transaction. Read it, Margot murmured to me. Make sure the language regarding the transfer of liability is explicit. I flipped to the third page. There it was, buried in the legalese. The Assini assumes full legal and financial responsibility for the digital assets and underlying code base upon execution of this document. He was taking the whole ship. He didn't realize there was a hole blown in the hull. I picked up the heavy black pen Ellis had provided. I hesitated for a fraction of a second. I could feel Ethan watching me. I could feel Beatrice practically vibrating with triumph in the corner. I signed my name on the first line. I initialed the second page. I signed the final page. I put the pen down and slid the stack back across the oak table. Ellis Strand picked it up, reviewed the signatures with a critical eye, and then nodded. He stamped the final page with his notary seal. Excellent, Ellis said, closing his folder. The transfer is complete. I will file the injunction release with the bank by close of business today. You should have access to the remaining $50,000 by Monday morning. Thank you, Ellis, Ethan said. He finally looked at me. He had the nerve to look slightly apologetic. I know this feels harsh right now, but it's for the best. The company needs stable leadership if it's going to survive the seed phase. I'll make sure your original vision is honored. I stared at him. The man I had married. The man who had emptied our house and tried to starve my developers out of a paycheck. You don't even know how the back end compiles, Ethan, I said softly. Ethan's apologetic mask slipped, replaced by a flash of genuine annoyance. I don't need to know how it compiles. I'm hiring a CTO on Monday, someone who isn't distracted by personal vendettas. From the corner of the room, Beatrice let out a small, satisfied sigh. Well, she said, standing up and smoothing her cashmere sweater, I think that concludes our business. Ethan, darling, we have a dinner reservation at Canlis at 6. We should get going. They thought it was over. They thought they had won. Margot reached into her leather briefcase. She didn't pull out a folder. She pulled out the single crumpled piece of cream-colored cardstock with the Crane and Company watermark. She placed it gently in the center of the oak table. Not quite finished, Margot said. Ellis frowned, looking at the crumpled paper. What is this? That, Margot said, leaning forward, is an unsigned letter that was left on my niece's kitchen island on Wednesday night. It explicitly threatens to contact the police with false allegations of embezzlement if she does not sign over her company. It is a textbook example of corporate extortion. Ethan blinked, looking at the letter. He hadn't written it. I could tell by the confusion on his face. He looked over at his mother. Beatrice's face had gone completely rigid. The smug satisfaction vanished, replaced by a cold, sudden tension. I have no idea what that is, Ellis said dismissively. It's unsigned. It could have been printed by anyone. It has zero legal weight in this room. It's printed on Crane and Company pearl white, 100% cotton cardstock, Margot countered smoothly. The exact same cardstock Beatrice used for her Symphony Gala invitations. A forensic analysis of the printer microdots will trace it directly back to her home office. Ellis didn't react visibly, but his eyes darted toward Beatrice for a fraction of a second. He was a good lawyer. He knew when a client had done something incredibly stupid behind his back, even if it were traced to my client. Ellis said, recovering his flat tone, extortion requires leverage. You just voluntarily signed the IP transfer. The transaction is complete. You have no damages to claim. We aren't claiming damages for the extortion, Margot said, a sharp, virile smile touching the corners of her mouth. She reached into her briefcase again. She pulled out a thick notarized document. She slapped it onto the table next to the extortion letter. We are claiming damages for unlawful imprisonment, physical endangerment, and tortious interference with a business contract. The room went entirely still. What are you talking about? Ethan asked, his voice suddenly lacking its previous confidence. That is a sworn, notarized affidavit from Callum Pierce, Margot said, tapping the document with a manicured fingernail. A former employee of the boutique hotel where you held your seed dinner. In this statement, under penalty of perjury, Miss Pierce testifies that he witnessed Beatrice intentionally jam a heavy brass luggage cart into the track of the service elevator, trapping my niece inside for nearly an hour during her own launch event. Beatrice actually took a step back, her back hitting the glass wall of the conference room. Her face had drained of all color. He's lying, Beatrice snapped, her voice shrill. He's a criminal. I had him fired yesterday for loitering and insubordination. Nobody will believe a word he says. You had him fired? Ellis asked, his head snapping toward Beatrice. His professional calm was finally fracturing. Beatrice, what did you do? I was protecting the family. She shot back. He was asking questions. He was snooping around. You just admitted to retaliatory termination of a witness on top of the original assault, Margot said, her voice dripping with sheer delight. You really are an amateur. Ethan looked at his mother in absolute horror. Mom, did you lock her in the elevator? It was a joke, Beatrice said, looking frantically between Ethan and Ellis. It was just supposed to be a little scare. I didn't think it would jam completely. It derailed a $2.5 million funding round, I said, finally speaking up, my voice cutting through the panic in the room. 3 venture capital firms pulled out the next morning, citing leadership instability, because I wasn't in the room to pitch. That is tortious interference. You cost me millions, and now I have the witness to prove it. Ellis Strand rubbed his temples. He looked at the signed IP transfer, then at the extortion letter, then at the affidavit. He was calculating the liability. He was doing the math on how fast he needed to drop Beatrice as a client. If you file this suit, Ellis said to Margot, trying to salvage some kind of leverage, it will take years to litigate. And in the meantime, Ethan owns the company. He owns the app. He can simply liquidate it. He owns the shell. I corrected him. Ethan looked at me. What do you mean? The algorithm you just took legal responsibility for? I said, leaning across the table, looking my husband dead in the eyes. It's a decoy. I had my developers extract the core proprietary logic this morning. The servers are currently running on a hollowed-out open-source placeholder. It will crash the second your new CTO tries to scale it. You didn't steal a tech company, Ethan. You stole a very expensive front-end interface with zero back-end functionality. Ethan's face went slack. He looked down at the documents he had just forced me to sign. The documents that transferred all legal liability and ownership directly to him. You can't do that, Ethan whispered. That's fraud. No, Margot corrected, standing up and buttoning her leather coat. She executed a security migration prior to the transfer of ownership. You bought the car, Ethan. It's not our fault you didn't look under the hood to see the engine was gone. Margot picked up the affidavit and slipped it back into her briefcase. She left the extortion letter sitting in the middle of the table. Garrett Mercer at Seattle Tech Weekly is expecting a call from me at 5:30, Margot said, looking directly at Beatrice. He's very eager to run a story about how a prominent Seattle socialite committed felony extortion, trapped her daughter-in-law in an elevator, and orchestrated a hostile corporate takeover. I imagine the Country Club Ethics Board will find it fascinating reading. Ellis Strand didn't yell. He didn't argue. He did exactly what a corporate attorney does when the floor falls out from under him. He slowly, deliberately closed his glossy black folder. As of this exact moment, Ellis said, his voice stripped of all its previous condescension, I am formally terminating my representation of you, Beatrice. I will not be party to an admitted felony. I strongly advise you to secure criminal defense counsel immediately. Beatrice stared at him, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. Ellis, you can't be serious. I pay you a retainer. You work for me. Not anymore, he said. He stood up, grabbed his briefcase, and looked down at Ethan. Ethan, my firm represents your mother's estate, not your LLC. You just signed an assumption of liability for a fraudulent tech asset while actively participating in what the state of Washington considers extortion. You need your own lawyer. Do not call my office. Ellis didn't look back. He walked out of the glass conference room, the heavy door swinging shut behind him. The silence that followed was absolute. Ethan looked at the door, then at me. The arrogant posture was completely gone, replaced by the panicked, hollow look of a man who suddenly realized he was standing on the tracks and the train was already blowing its horn. Listen, Ethan said, holding his hands up, his voice cracking. We can fix this. I didn't know about the luggage cart. I swear to God I didn't. She just told me you were having a breakdown and spending the company money. I was trying to protect the investment. You were trying to steal my company, I said, my voice dead calm. You watched me panic over payroll, and you hired movers to steal my dining table while I was trying to keep my developers from getting evicted. Do not play the victim, Ethan. It doesn't suit you. Margot checked her gold wristwatch. It's 5:05. I call Garrett Mercer in 25 minutes. Beatrice put her face in her hands. A sharp, pathetic wheeze escaped her throat. It wasn't the elegant, tragic weeping she usually deployed for sympathy. It was the raw, ugly sound of complete social destruction. What do you want? Ethan asked, his voice entirely defeated. First, I said, pointing to his phone resting on the oak table. You call the bank branch manager. You lift the injunction on the corporate accounts right now. I want to see the email confirmation from the bank before I leave this room. Ethan didn't hesitate. He picked up his phone and dialed. He spoke in clipped, hurried sentences, verifying his social security number and authorizing the immediate release of the freeze. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed with an automated alert. The $50,000 was unlocked. Second, Margot said, taking over seamlessly. You will contact your mother's stationer and have a formal retraction sent to every single person on that BCC list. You will state that the previous email was sent in error due to a miscommunication, that the company's finances are pristine, and that you are stepping down from the board to pursue other ventures. You will CC my niece on it. And the house? Ethan asked quietly. You're going to sign a quitclaim deed, I said. You're taking your name off the title. You can keep the furniture you took today, but you are never stepping foot on that property again. We filed the divorce papers on Monday. Uncontested, Beatrice finally looked up. Her mascara was running down her cheeks, settling into the fine lines around her eyes. She looked 10 years older than she had when she walked into the room. If we do all this, Beatrice whispered, her voice shaking. If we do what you want, do you bury the affidavit? Do you call off the reporter? Margot looked at her with a cold, terrifying smile. I'll call Garrett and tell him the scoop changed. I'll tell him the real story is that Beatrice Harlow is retiring from public life to focus on her family, effective immediately, which means you are going to log into your country club portal right now and draft your resignation. Then you're going to resign from the symphony board. If I ever see your name in the social section of the Seattle Times again, I mail the affidavit to the police. Beatrice didn't argue. She pulled her phone from her designer purse with trembling hands and started typing. We didn't wait for her to finish. I picked up the original signed IP transfer document, the one that legally shackled Ethan to a useless, empty line of code, and folded it into my pocket. Let's go, I said to Margot. We walked out of the conference room. I didn't look back at Ethan. I didn't look back at Beatrice. The heavy glass doors of the law firm hissed shut behind us, and we stepped into the elevator. Margot pressed the button for the lobby. She let out a long, satisfied exhale, smelling faintly reminiscently of Virginia Slims and Victory. Not bad for a Friday afternoon, she said. Thank you, I said, leaning against the polished metal wall of the elevator. My legs were trembling, the adrenaline finally crashing out of my system, leaving me lightheaded but incredibly light. I couldn't have done this without you. You did the hard part, Margot said, reaching over and adjusting the collar of my blazer. You built something worth stealing. Never apologize for that. We walked out onto 4th Avenue. The late afternoon sun was breaking through the Seattle clouds, casting long, golden shadows across the wet pavement. Margot hugged me once, tight and brief, before catching a cab to the airport. She had a flight back to Phoenix to catch. I walked the 6 blocks back to Pioneer Square. When I pushed open the door to the office, the smell of roasted coffee and old dust hit me. It smelled like mine. Rowan and Petra were sitting at their desks. They looked up, tense, waiting for the verdict. I pulled out my phone, opened the banking app, and turned the screen around so they could see it. Available balance, $50,000 cents. Rowan let out a loud, echoing whoop, spinning his chair in a full circle. Petra dropped her head onto her desk, laughing in pure relief. We got it? Petra asked, looking up. He bought the pumpkin? He bought the pumpkin, I said, dropping my bag onto my desk and walking over to the whiteboard. I picked up an eraser and wiped away the chaotic migration maps we had drawn over the last 48 hours. Boot up the real servers. Resync the external drive. We're pushing the live update on Sunday exactly as planned. I sat down in my chair. The office was quiet, except for the frantic, joyful clatter of mechanical keyboards as Rowan and Petra worked. I opened my laptop. I had emails to send. I had an app to run. I looked out the large industrial window at the city. For the first time in a week, I didn't feel trapped in a box. The doors were wide open.